Can you hear me now?
I just wanted to say Rebecca Long Bailey, who's like a massive ally to Palestine. She said she's a Zionist as well, and she said she defined it as, I agree with a secure Israel state, a secure Israel alongside a viable Palestinian state. I suppose that makes me a Zionist, because I agree with Israel's right to exist.
Exactly. It depends on your definition of Zionist. I completely agree. Because if we take, like what you've made, Emil, is a very important point, right? If we take that definition, then a lot of us in the room are Zionists. If we simply, if the definition is that we think that Jews have a right to safety and to self-representation, then many of us would be Zionists. But are we Zionists in the contemporary sense of the word, which is we believe that Jewish safety outweighs any other safety? No, we're not.
Jewish ethno-religious nationalism.
It's a form. It's a form of fascism. Zionism has morphed into a form of fascism. This is the bottom line. However you want to dress it up, that is
ultra-nationalism. Like there are a lot of ultra-nationalist movements around the world. If you want to take that kind of wider definition of fascism, you could probably call Trump a fascist, or I mean, I'd say he is a crypto-fascist, or almost a fascist. And you could say Hungary is a fascist state, Poland's a fascist. How many countries around the world, mate, are run by kind of right-wing populists right now, ultra-nationalists? If we're going to use the fascists to, I'm just saying, I try to reserve fascists for the really worst cases.
Nezem, what do you think about this?
Sorry, I came in late.
No worries.
I came in like towards the middle of the conversation, so
no worries.
I tend to be one of those people who believe in like a two-state solution, simply because like what has happened now is being done, and somehow people need to learn to like move forward basically, and learn to kind of forgive, but also there needs to be justice as well for the people that have suffered on both sides.
That's a very diplomatic. It's a very good answer.
It's very diplomatic.
I definitely agree with you. Like, I don't know, I believe in two-state solution, and I'm sometimes like attacked by fellow Arabs, like for even saying that, because I don't know, there's some Arabs and some Israelis who are like, it's all ours on either side.
Yeah.
And I don't think if you just like keep that mindset that any solution is going to be found, if that makes sense.
What did they say to you when you, out of interest, when you discuss this with other Arabs and they say you're a traitor or a Zionist? What did they say
Yeah.
But do they give a reason why they say that?
I completely understand their reason behind it, because they say like all the injustices that Palestinians have been through, and they have been through like an awful amount of injustice in their own like homeland. But I don't know, I'm more of a person that tries to find a solution rather than, I don't know.
I think what some people might argue, because you're arguing about the two-state solution, but you forgot about the Palestinians who have been kicked out in 1948 and in 1967, because these people millions have been displaced. They now live in Jordan, Syria, some of them in Iraq, some of them have been.
But brother Omar, you're the one who made the point yesterday about the expulsion of all the Jewish people from the Arab states, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is the problem, right? Like, there is actually, do you guys know the term, the Yeshuv, the pre-Israeli Jewish community in Palestine, right? There's known as that.
I'm not familiar with this term. Can you explain?
Known as the Yeshuv. So when you refer to, that's all it means. Also, when you refer to the pre-Israeli Jewish community in that region, and they already existed, it numbered in the hundreds of thousands before the founding of the State of Israel. Some of the Tel Aviv was founded at the turn of this century, like we're talking the early 1900s. Like the city was born in 1900s, 1910s, 1920s, and the Jews were there before Israel. Some of them, well, there's always been a Jewish presence there, but they increased in numbers, started increasing in numbers from the kind of late 1800s.
I think I read in Jerusalem, like 1800 is probably like 40%. Maybe 50%. I don't know about a few statistics. I'm not sure whether they are reliable. So they say up to 40%, 50% are Jewish.
Yeah, exactly. And look, we also have to remember that when Israel was founded, with all the injustices committed against the Palestinians, I don't necessarily say I'm buying into that right-wing talking point about tit for tat. Like, what about it's okay, we did it because the Arabs did it? What I'm saying is this is all wrong. And the way that the Arab nationalists responded, as we discussed yesterday, by kicking out hundreds of thousands of Jewish people. I mean, a lot of people don't know today, actually, which is really interesting. I reckon from the birth of Israel onward, this is the case, because I know it's the case today. A majority of the Jewish people in Israel now are of actually Mizrahi or mixed descent, not Ashkenazi descent. So most of them, a majority of them, can trace some kind of Arab lineage. So if you want to say that we should bring the Palestinians back, then you're going to have to answer for the fact that they could say, oh, you know, the people who lived there, the Zionists who took their homes. Like, okay, but there's both of the angles to consider.
Okay,
like you're giving the home of a Palestinian back to them.
I've heard this argument before, right? Now, what I would say to that is, when people refer to history to justify their home or their citizenship or nationality, where do you draw the line? Because arguably, if you go back far enough, do we give Britain to the Vikings? Do we give Britain to Norway? Do you give Portugal to Spain because it was Iberia? Do you move all the Arabs out of North Africa and give it to Ghanaians? Where does this end, right? You have to draw a line somewhere, because if you go back far enough, you find Israelis. If you go back far enough, you find Arabs. You go back far enough, you find Jews. You go back more than that, you don't find Arabs or Jews. Does that mean that some other like ethnic group should be there, not even Arabs or Jews? The point is that the injustice has to stop at some point. And if we take international law as the current standard, then from that point onwards, what is happening now is an injustice. We need to decide between us what our point of reference is. And right now, it seems like most people agree that the point of reference is international law. That's what most people agree on.
That's what I'm saying, though. I'm saying if you're going to bring the Palestinians, give them the right percent, because when people say we need to undo the injustices of 1948, what they normally mean is let all the Palestinians that were kicked out of Israel within the 1967 borders are good to go back to the country. But those houses are now occupied by the, I don't know, the third, fourth, fifth generation descendants of those people who committed that original crime. And if you kick those Jewish Israelis out of their homes, Palestinians, then where are you going to send them?
But you agree, but do you agree that they deliberately complicated the situation? Because they know that if we put people there in these settlements and they give birth, the situation is going to get complicated. It's
Exactly.
not a
That's why I'm saying that the settlements. This is what I'm saying. Remember I said yesterday that the people after 1967, when Jordan essentially handed back the West Bank to Israel, I think within a couple of decades of that point, when the Palestinians saw the trajectory of it and how the settlements were growing and growing and growing, they should have realized, look, in 20 years from now, they're going to be settlers who are second, third generation, because as soon as those Jewish people moved into the settlements, they're having kids, they're having grandkids. Like, as soon as you end up having that kind of multi-generational occupancy, it would be like, as you say, an endless cycle. You could go back to America and say, well, you're the 10th generation descendant of someone who came and kicked this Apache Indian out of his home. Get the hell out, you know? Like, it's
fine. So we can talk. By the way, for the record, guys, in case you haven't noticed, Sean is actually Jewish ethnic. Well, like originally, he converted to Islam recently, like a few years back. So look, I don't buy the argument that a Jewish Russian with blonde hair and blue eyes has more connection to that area of land than an Arab guy that speaks the regional dialect of Arabic that was derived from the Aramaic in that region. That is just, to be frank, that's complete bullshit, right? So we need to cut the crap when it comes to that discussion, okay? The question now is, what do you do with people that had no hand in this war? The people that are children to those that are settlers, that are born in that situation. Do you think it's justified to oust them from their area?
My view is a one-state solution. Whenever you have the modern solution to any kind of settler colonial project is to say, look, you really want to live where these people live so bad, and you really want these people as your neighbors, then treat them as your neighbors. You're going to share a country with them, you're going to share a community with them, and you're going to live, and you're going to end up living in a shared state. And this Arab that you live next to has the right to vote in the same elections you do, have the right to drive in the same roads you do. You want to be their neighbors so bad, and live with them as neighbors, good neighbors.
Right. So Omar, Amal, Nazim, what do you think about a one-state solution?
Yeah, if it's just going to be a one-state solution, then everyone should have the right to vote. Like, democracy, but as far as I'm aware, not everyone, it's not fair play in Israel. Like, not everyone has the right to self-determination.
You mean that there aren't equal rights for Arabs? Well, there's let me just say this: people they're right to describe Israel as an apartheid state, but I don't think they're right to not make that distinction between Israel proper and the wanted. Sorry, my wife just showed me something saying that she likes the one-state solution too. My wife's just coming over and saying, I agree with you. But Smini, if you're going to interrupt my podcast, you should come and say hello at some point, you know. But sorry, but anyway, no, they can't. It's right. They have to make a distinction between the West Bank and Israel, because within Israel, the Arabs, okay, they have the right to vote. The third largest party within Israel is the Joint List, which is actually an allegiance of the kind of major Arab political parties within Israel, and it's shameful. I say that as a compliment, but also as an insult, in that if you look at the current political climate in Israel, it's truly shameful. At the last election, everyone could see that the only way to get out of this Groundhog Day that the Israelis are going through, which is like what we're all going through now, which because they had like 3 elections in the space of a year or something, right? They said, look, you guys have to recognize neither of you is going to break the stalemate. And the only person that can give either party a majority in the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, is the Joint List. Why are both of you refusing to go talk to the Joint List? And they both basically came out, because the political climate is now so right-wing in Israel now, that they both came out, including the supposed opposition, Benny Gantz, who was supposed to be some kind of alternative Netanyahu, and said, I would never form a coalition with the Arabs. Like, oh, do you think I am crazy? Like, how dare the Arabs have even it's nuts. Like, it's, so yes, they have some kind of, on paper, they have greater equality in Israel, but I think after the nation state law, which is like a de jure clarification of the fact that Arabs aren't really seen as equals within Israel. And then on top of that, there are small ways that they're discriminated.
Do you think that Israel, okay, so does everyone think that Israel...
What happened in Eva, they showed that the last general election also showed that they don't really see Arabs as equals. So it's on paper.
Yeah, but wait, do you think that Israel is going to be put in a situation where it's going to have to accept a one-state solution in order to survive?
Yeah, but I'm saying they're not there now, because think about it, they've only got 20% of the population in Israel as Arab, and they already see them as a threat, and like, we don't want them to have a part in any kind of permanent government or a permanent coalition. And imagine how much they'd freak out at the thought that there would be 45% or 50% of the population would be Arab. Because if you were to have a one-state solution, if they were to annex the West Bank, and certainly
the thing is,
Gaza and the Golan Heights, so it would be almost a perfect 50-50 split. It would be either kind of 45% Jewish or 45% Arab. You know what I mean? There's that kind of 10% variable, so 45-55.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, but you know, okay, ML raises a good point in the chat. She says that it's nice in theory, but in practice, when you've got 2 groups that deeply hate each other, and they do, some people deeply hate, like, and to an extent, you can understand.
Sorry, I wasn't ignoring you. I was just saying that I think there's a deep mistrust. It's not just hate, it's mistrust. Like, the Jewish people in Israel think that if they were to let the Arabs into the government, even if it's only 20% of the population in the third largest party in the Knesset, they would somehow sabotage the Jewish people's aspirations. They just don't trust each other. I'm not saying it's right. Obviously, it's horrendous, but they think the Arabs don't have their best interests at heart. It's just like the Arabs believe the same, and vice versa. Like, I would say, obviously, the Arabs have a lot more justification for that belief in terms of the balance of power is clearly on the Israeli side at the moment. But this, and to answer your point again now, Amal,
that it's understandable.
If you look at the New Israel Foundation and other really important bodies in Israel, they are working on that front. There's the Abraham Foundation, like the really great initiatives within Israel. They're all about Arab-Jewish partnerships. They have like mixed Arab-Jewish schools, they protect mixed Jewish-Arab marriages from groups like Lahava, who are right-wing paramilitary almost organizations in Israel that go and attack Jewish-Muslim weddings and things like this. So they're trying to push for Jewish-Muslim integration as a means of kind of ending that barrier and seeing that these communities can trust each other. But sorry, I was pleasing to me.
No, that's it. Okay, well, look, I think, again, Emma raises a good point, which is that education, it sounds like a cliche, but it's really true. If you take it from this angle, education in future generations could resolve the situation, right? Because right now, the antidote to hatred, in my opinion, is globalization. It's the internet, it's radio, it's online gaming, it's Xbox chat, anything that basically removes barriers, right? Sorry?
You're like the right wing's worst nightmare, the globalists.
Exactly. Now, why do the right wing hate globalism? They hate globalism because globalism is the antidote to fascism and nationalism, because it deconstructs. It doesn't matter how tall Trump's wall is. It doesn't matter how tall the apartheid wall between Israel and the occupied area is. Xbox Live still works, right? That's why they hate globalism, right? Now, the crucial thing is for educators to get their role right in the classroom. I think in Arab countries, like in North Africa as well as the Middle East, citizenship, sociology should be compulsory subjects, 100%. Politics, it's not practical to make politics a compulsory subject in the Arab world right now because of sensitivities or whatever. But these are basic things that we're not getting right. We're not teaching people from a young age, what is this war? What does it mean? Why people think like this? Because the hatred, I use a distinction here, whilst it is understandable, it's not justifiable. I understand why a Palestinian child would hate an Israeli or would hate all Jews. I understand it in the sense that if you're being persecuted daily, you can't even go to hospital without going through a checkpoint. It makes sense why an irrational child would develop a generalized hatred for an entire population. It's not justified, right? But we break this down for the right form of pedagogy, for the right form of education. And a lot of the solutions we discuss in the Arab world are top down. You know, what did Gaddafi say in some meeting with someone else about this particular annexation of land or whatever? But we never ever talk about bottom up solutions. None of our solutions are grassroots. I haven't heard a single Arab politician talk about a grassroots solution to the Palestinian problem.
It's discouraged, isn't it? They don't want the grassroots activism because that's what led to the Arab Spring and stuff.
That's a good point. That's a good point, because there's going to be collateral damage. You can't be conscious and politically awake when it comes to one country and then contain it to just Palestine. Because if you understand the Palestinian problem, you understand the Egyptian problem, you understand the Moroccan problem, then it creates, you're right, I think it's not in the interest of our own leaders to develop that consciousness in students.
Civic consciousness. Of course they don't want an active civic society. I mean, come on, man. I mean, I don't think they even really want that here. Like, look at what they did to crush the kind of third sector, you know, the charitable sector and so on with austerity. One of the first people to get hit, and people to get hit the hardest were the kind of third sector. People don't want aware, conscious, educated citizens because, I mean, it's the last thing the communists to look at it, not just from this kind of warm, fluffy liberal perspective, but even from kind of, it's a universally kind of left of center point of view that from a liberal perspective, from even the kind of socialist or even communist perspective, and that it was the last demand of the Communist Manifesto that there be universal education. Because if you aren't because society is great, and we believe, communists as much as anyone or leftists, we all believe in the social unit and how important society is, a functioning, healthy society. But at the end of the day, society is built up of individuals. The basic unit of society is individuals and the nuclear family, right? And if you aren't an educated, self-aware and empowered individual who understands your place in the world and what's right in it and what's wrong in it, then, you know, you can't even start. You have to start from the ground up. Like, if you want to talk about grassroots, like, you've got to build a Lego piece by piece.
Exactly, right? Exactly. Unconsciousness comes from a different angle to us because we look at it more through a political lens, where I suspect Nazim sees it potentially from a religious angle. Would you like to elaborate on your background, Nazim, and maybe your education, your activities?
My education on this is complete ignorance, basically. I mean, I've been following the news for about 20 years when it comes to the Palestinian-Israel issue. But the last couple of years, I haven't really been following it as much as I used to before. And also, like, initially, I used to be more favorable towards the Palestinians, but now I'm more interested in, like, you know, saving lives. So it's not regardless of whether you're an Arab or a Jew or whoever. Like, you can't oppress, like, kill, take, you know, life regardless of the person believes like you do or not. So that's why I do feel like there's been injustice done on both sides. Like, there's been killing and murder done on both sides. And also the people that did the wrong need to be brought to justice in order to repair the wrong that they've done. But also, like Brother Sean was mentioning, now we're in, like, maybe the third or fourth generation now of people who've been living there. And for them, you know, Palestine and Israel is their home. They don't know any other home besides where they are now. And so there needs to be a way in which both sides can live together peacefully, but at the same time, the injustices that were done, they still need to be right as well. international community.
Nezim, what would you say to somebody? This isn't my opinion, okay? It's just devil's advocate. But what would you say to somebody that had an argument similar to the one that Malcolm X used to have in his own civic rights movement, which is that if you want to rectify an injustice, you need to be imbalanced from your end in order to push the scale back in the middle? What do you, because I struggle to respond to this kind of claim.
I don't really know, to be honest.
Fair enough. I struggle.
Could you maybe explain that?
If you had a seesaw, you sit on one side and the other person's just interested in swinging it back their direction.
Yeah, so some people say, okay, because the injustice is so grave and it's so like radical from the Zionist side that we might need our own kind of counter form of radical thought in order to push back the equilibrium. This is what some people say. Before I take your view, I've actually developed an opinion just now, which is that it seems like the counter extreme might be quicker in the short term, but it's unsustainable, where I think a balanced approach might take longer to kick in, but it's a more sustainable approach. I think that's probably,
I mean, this is probably the view of like the older generation, but I think like many of the new generation, they're more willing to now kind of build bridges between both communities and you know, try to find a way forward which is both beneficial for both sides and everyone.
We need to have this conversation of reparations across the world, like reparations in response to colonialism, which is Israel, I think, is just a continuation of that kind of racist nationalism that we saw in Europe. I mean, they were responding to, let's not forget that the world that Israel was born in was towards the tail end of the European colonial project. That there were a lot of these countries, like in Africa, India, none of these places had even got independence yet. And we need to respond to this whole logic of colonialism. And if you look, it was really amazing. There was this podcast I listened to a few months back where someone was saying that I think it was HSBC or Lloyd's, actually, one of the major banks now had only recently finished being paid back for the loan or for the debt that they were owed after they bailed out the slaves. Like the slaves that were freed 200 years ago when the UK legalized made slavery illegal, the slave owners claimed that they were owed a debt because they had to release all their slaves. And they were only paid back, some of these slave owners or their descendants or the companies or institutions that they founded, like hundreds of years later. Like, but they're getting paid back. So why is it so radical and so insane to say that the people who are the victims of colonialism, that there should be some redress of this balance?
True.
Yeah, but we should be at least willing to have that conversation. But people think when you start talking about reparations for colonialism and slavery,
well, you know, if you look at it in one sense, what Israel did was itself a radical solution. The Zionist solution, which is that, you know, Jews are historically persecuted, which they are historically, I believe they are historically persecuted, right? Therefore, let's implement and impose this state in a territory that we have some form of connection with, right? That is a radical solution to a radical problem, which has proven unsustainable because now it's increasingly difficult for Israeli diplomats, politicians, for the current government there to justify their behavior. And it's actually undermining the state. So I guess what Israel is doing right now is a good argument against a radical solution to a radical problem, right?
They created a new undercurrent, didn't they? That's all they did.
Yeah. Now, if you look at recent polls, I know Norman Finkelstein is quite a controversial guy, but I would say that he's quite robust academically, and he done a few polls on this and found that American Jews are falling out of content and empathy with Israeli policies, and actually more young Jews today disagree with what Israel's doing than agree. So
not
that
to blow
radical approach is not sustainable.
I saw this during Operation Protective Edge, man. I mean, obviously, it's my interest to say I was ahead of the curve, but I honestly think I wasn't this. And I was already telling people that maybe the only solution to this problem is, of course, education. And that the fact that this education might be happening quicker and will finish happening earlier in the US, in the American Jewish community than it will in the Israeli Jewish community. the US Jewish community will end up pushing the Israeli Jewish community more towards their opinion, because the Israeli Jewish community is, of course, really connected and dependent on the kind of American Jewish community. And
exactly.
They did communities back in 20 polls, and back in 2015 and 2014 on protective edge. Actually, no, because that was the time I saw those polls. They might have been even of the population even earlier, like 2012 or 2013 polls. So they said that a majority of Jewish Americans under the age of, I think it was 30 or 25, already then, a majority of Jewish Americans under the age of 25 or 30 believed that they had more sympathy with the Palestinians than they did with Israel. And that's among young Jewish Americans. So that's crazy, right? Like that's mad. And that also feeds into the conversation we're having yesterday, and we've had many times, that arguably the biggest differentiator here in any part of the world in terms of between different political demographics and in their varying viewpoints is between the elderly and the young. Like the biggest, I think, political divide you'll see is always between the younger and the older.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I want to gauge the young opinion of Omar al-Baidi. Now, do you think that Salsabed was making the argument as to whether or not the one-state solution is a more radical opinion than the two-state solution? So, Omar, I'm not sure if you can talk, but if you can, what's your opinion?
So, I don't think Israel would accept the one-state solution, because I think their goal eventually is to make Israel completely Jewish. And then I think this is their goal. So it's very impossible to accept like a one-state solution that they allow people treat them equally. Arabs give them like right to vote and the free movement, so these people can go and live wherever they want. I think is impossible.
Omar, they're going to lose. They aren't going to pull that off, because we've seen they've been for decades, and all they've done, as we were just discussing, is turned their most reliable, because you have to remember, guys, that 90% of the world's Jewish people live in either Israel or the US, and the remaining 10% live in various places like the UK, France, and so on. So the US Jewish community is the main Jewish community. It's just as big as an important a Jewish community as the Israeli Jewish community, I would argue. And in fact, the city with the most Jewish people on earth is New York, not Jerusalem. And this attempt to homogenize that region by the Israeli Zionist state, the nationalists, they're not succeeding. I mean, the Palestinian population is going up, and the defining trait, you could argue, of the Palestinian movement you could argue is sumud, perseverance. That's their slogan, sumud, perseverance. They are not going to leave, and they know that just by remaining in that land and eking out a living for them, they are.
I think, to be honest, if there's any other people or nation, and the whole world, almost the whole world, the strongest countries are against them, they would be wiped out. But I think the Palestinians have been very resistive, and for all that period.
Yeah, man, they've stuck.
Hannah makes a good point, which is that maybe I was thinking this as well, actually. Maybe we need to campaign for the one-state solution, which we all seem to agree is the more radical idea, in order for the scale to come into the middle for the two-state solution. I know that contradicts my point earlier about the Malcolm X attitude, right? But it could be a practical thing to do that. She says, although it's idealistic, this would be the only way to please the Palestinians, which are ultimately the victims. I agree. I agree.
I said the same as you, but in reverse. I said campaign for the two-state solution, but by doing so, we will prove that the two-state solution is a joke and no longer viable, and then end up getting the one-state solution. If we just create the appetite for peace and make people realize that there is no peace and no justice in that land, especially for the Palestinians, then they will want a solution, any solution, as long as it brings peace and it brings an end. So we have to highlight their suffering and also what the benefits of creating peace in that part of the world could be. And if you point out that I think the two-state solution is dead, and I think it's going to get to the point very soon where more people are going to realize that there's less chance of there being a realistic two-state solution than there being a realistic one-state solution.
Do you think we will see a solution in our lifetime?
I think there will, because mate, in our lifetime, I think some crazy stuff could happen. I mean, you know me, I'm a total idealist. I think the US and China are gonna, that their race to get to Mars by the 2030s is going to play. I mean, are we really, honestly, to think, imagine for a moment that we are going to have artificial intelligence or you know, automation, like robots, and we're going to be traveling the stars. You know, we're going to have like colonies on Mars by the 2030s, 40s, 50s. Are we still really going to be debating this stuff by that point? Like, you'd hope not, wouldn't you? Like, I think the world's so crazy, and in 20, 30, 40 years, I mean, you know about the idea of the exponential increase in kind of technological complexity. Like, with the past 10,000 years, the past 100 years have seen more technological change than in the 10,000 years before that. And in the past 10,000 years, which is kind of roughly corresponds.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Period where we've had agriculture is more, where there was more change and complexity than there was in 100,000 years before that.
That's a good point. If we can solve space travel, then why can't we solve Israel and Palestine? You're right. I agree. Yeah. Nazim, when did your attitude, by the way, guys, we'll try to wrap up at 1:30, so in 10 minutes time. But I just want to extract a few more crucial ideas before we do this. I think Nazim may have gone off chat. Oh no, he's back. I wanted to ask you, Nazim, when did your views change? When did you become more diplomatic about this as opposed to kind of stubborn? When did your stubbornness ease out into a more
probably just to do with my friends, people I've met and spoken to, and kind of like been influenced by their views, and just kind of reflecting on it myself for a long time, and just coming to my own understanding. I mean, basically, I'm a product of my own environment and of my own experience. So some of those experiences, you know, have been positive, and others have been a bit negative as well. So that's kind of shit. I mean, basically, I've had some nice, pleasant experience with Jews, who also happen to be Zionists as well, I guess. But then I've also had some negative experience with Muslims who are for the Palestinian rights, which I am as well. But at the same time, I can see like how like Muslims can sometimes be biased, just as you can also get other people being biased as well towards their own people and cause. And these days, I'm just more interested in, you know, in humans rather than, you know, which society or group they belong to. Yeah.
Exactly. I know this is a bit of a tangent, but you follow my some of my stuff on Facebook, right? You are based. Are you based in Reading? Are you around Reading as well, like where Oz and I went to university?
So are you asking me, Sean?
Yeah. I said, are you based in Reading? Just out of curiosity.
Sorry. No, I'm in Forest Gate, East London.
Oh, right. For some reason, there was a connection there between you.
We have like Labour is very strong here in Newham. They've been strong for decades, and we even have like a socialist workers' party as well, and they're also very they're Marxist as well as pro-Palestinian as well.
Yeah. Well, it's I've seen some of your stuff on Facebook as well as getting.
Yeah.
You're very.
I came across you once posting on Daniel Jew.
Oh yeah.
Something like this was like a couple of years ago, and then from there I started to follow you.
Thanks. That guy drove me. I don't know. He's a bit of a funny one.
Yeah, and the stuff she's been coming out with recently on COVID as well is dangerous. Really? Just kind of like saying this kind of conspiracy to shut down the masjids, and you know, people don't want us to pray during Ramadan and all of this kind of stuff.
You know that cliche? I'm just going to tell Nazim, I'm going to tell Oz who he is. You know, Oz, there's that cliche, isn't there? That people who convert to Islam are either kind of really warm and kind of Sufi types, or they go like full Salafi kind of, you know, mad thing. And that guy went the other direction from me.
What he went Daesh or?
Yeah, almost. He's like all that. Like he says he has no labels. This is the irony, right? Like I am only Muslim, but I am anti-feminist, anti-liberal, anti-everything. He's like, I have no label, but my label is anti-this, anti-that, anti-flipping everything. Like, it's ironic. But the guy is, he's one of the proper culture warriors, you know? Like, and I don't really want that, because we've seen what the culture war has done to places like the US, man. Like, I really don't want that. Shit over here and just, no thanks.
But, you know, I think Nazim touched up on something which was very important, which is that it goes back to my point about, understanding but not rationalizing. I want to make this clear, but like how a young Palestinian child can develop hatred for a community who resembles that of his occupier, right? Now, if it is true, we are products of our environment, we're products of our friends, the music we listen to, the games we play, whatever, yeah? We're like a sponge. You can only squeeze out whatever water or material you put into it, right? So, so if people in Gaza are blockaded, their telecommunications are cut, they can't travel, they don't have access to trade, and they're sanctioned, and there's this animosity brewing between each other. It's no surprise why there would be, why someone would develop hatred views.
Yeah.
But what I don't appreciate is when Zionists online then use this as an argument to support Israel. They're using something negative, which Israel is directly responsible for, to then justify Israel's existence. Well, have you seen the Arabs? They're full of hatred. Yeah, but are you not at least in part responsible for that? Like, you're partly responsible for that. And you know that. I think policymakers like Netanyahu, I think they know what they're doing when they're breeding this hatred, and they know it plays right into their hands. When you see these, when you see videos of Hamas children saying like, "Death to Israel, we're gonna conquer," it justifies Israel's existence, because essentially all Israel needs to say is, if you don't want this form of Islam to exist, then support us. We're the antithesis. So,
You're right.
Sorry, go on, Nazim, you jump.
No, I was just saying you're right, Omar. I mean, this type of rhetoric does justify Israel's existence, just like every time Hamas, for example, attacks Israel. It's nowhere in the same scale or level that Israel when it retaliates, but it still justifies them in the minds of many people. So
yeah. It's a vicious feedback loop. Like when you have people, the right-wing nationalists feed off each other like parasites, you know, like the right-wing, this is what people don't understand. When you spread that hatred of the other, even if you're kind of more the oppressed part in this case, you know, you justify the narrative of the other. Like the Israelis, Jews have this narrative that they are Zionists, that the land belongs more to them. And even if they wanted to share it with the Arabs don't want to share it with them. It's what I saw them kind of thing. We can't share, like kind of kindergarten logic, right? And the Palestinians, when they indulge in certain, shall we say, opposing rhetoric about the Jews all being invaders and they don't, you know, they're evil and blah blah blah, they enforce the Jewish narrative in turn, and then the Jewish narrative then, as being enforced, reinforces itself and then more supports them. So it's a vicious. We are a product of our environment, but we have a responsibility to challenge our programming, not necessarily for its own sake, but to try and contextualize our place, to see things through God's eyes, in the sense, try and see things through God's eyes, inshallah, and that He is above space and time. He sees things from the perspective of putting yourself in another person's shoes, right? Isn't that like what it means to be divine? I know I'm getting a bit cosmic here, but, and I know people also, especially in the Muslim world, have more of a mixed view of Gandhi, but he said something which I thought was very profound, and I'll be very happy to end on that note, which was, it's human to err, but it's divine to forgive, right? Like to see something through the eyes of another human being and to put yourself in their perspective. Yeah, man.
You've just mentioned Gaddafi, and I thought that was interesting because that's like one of the things, like Gaddafi's one of the people that made me change my opinion on the Palestinian-Israeli like conflict, because obviously, like from a Muslim standpoint, you always see the Palestinians as the victims, which they completely are, but it kind of like sometimes you overshadow Israeli like struggle, Jewish struggle as well, and when you look at the Jews that were in Libya, you know, Gaddafi took all their property from them and said all debts to Jews were cancelled and immigration was prohibited, so they couldn't even leave if they wanted to. And seeing that injustice as well, like kind of made me have more sympathy to a Jewish state, if that makes sense.
Like, if I may interject, I completely agree with what Aman has said, but at the same time, two wrongs don't make a right. So even though the Arabs have, stripped the Jewish people of their rights in their respective countries, it doesn't mean that Israel can do that to the Palestinians. And a lot of people
I don't think they can. I'm just saying that the struggle on both sides, and I think a lot of times these days when you point out the Jewish struggle as well, you kind of you're kind of made to seem like you're a traitor to Islam, because it's like religions on both sides. It's a very emotional topic, so you're kind of undermining the Palestinian struggle. People think you are.
Like, I mentioned that I support a one-state solution, and in saying so, I don't necessarily or strictly believe that it should just be for the Muslims. I have many Palestinian friends who agree that Palestine or Israel or whatever you want to call it should be a land for the Palestinians, whether they be Muslim, Jewish or Christian, and that they should have the same rights. Although, of course, whether that's practical or not is a different question. But if we're talking about an objective kind of sense, and if you're looking at it, you know, what's right and what's wrong, the Palestinians are the victims, as we already said, and that they should have their rights afforded to them rather than being, you know, rather than apartheid. Basically,
maybe to wrap it up with, what do you, if we suppose the question to everyone, there was a one-state solution, should we call it Israel or Palestine or both, like Israel, Palestine?
Yeah, that's just what I was about to say, because I was going to say we had a conversation about it before, and Salsabel said that it should be called Palestine, and I just said I find it very difficult for Jewish people to agree to that, because again, like you said, two wrongs don't make a right.
Yeah, no, two wrongs. What would you say, Oscar?
I don't know enough about I don't know enough about the etymological or linguistic roots and significance of both those words. I need to look up the Quranic significance of the word Israel.
I would call it something else. I would call it Canaan.
So that
I think looking at it from an Islamic perspective, I would call it Palestine. Strictly because I'm Muslim, and
well,
I
actually,
think
you know, that's less. I would argue that's less. I would say that it's a result of Arab nationalism to call it Palestine, because Palestina, it comes from, or the state of Syria, Palestina, people say has Latin origin, because after the Romans kicked out all the Jews after the Judean revolt, they tried to give it a secular name, and what the Romans defined as, I don't know, a secular or pro-Roman name or a Latin name, and that was Syria, Palestina, and it's the name that the
in the Quran, when it talks about Beni Israel,
Semitic origin. It's it's the name that we believe, Muslims and Jews believe, that God gave to Yaqub, and just from an Islamic perspective, just to throw a spanner in the works.
In the Quran, when they talk about Beni Israel, aren't they talking about specific people in that land, not necessarily the nation of Israel, but the Jews of that nation? That's what I mean.
That's the interpretation that's widely accepted.
That's just reminded me of a pro-Israel argument that said Palestine doesn't exist because Palestine doesn't exist because the letter P doesn't exist in Arabic.
Then Pepsi doesn't exist, you know? Like, it's just, I saw this as well. I just wanted to touch up on something Emel said, which is about Gaddafi. Now, I'm not Libyan myself, but so I'm Moroccan, right? And when I went to Reading, I got involved with a lot of Libyans. Some of their families were persecuted by Gaddafi, and some were actually involved with Gaddafi's family. Now, my point of view is that when it comes to Palestine, I think a lot of leaders, whatever you think about Gaddafi, a lot of leaders justify their opinions and their policies on the basis of them being anti-Israel, because they know that mobilizes consensus. So you see Vladimir Putin do it. You see people, you know, they watch Russia Today and they love Putin and they think he's like this alpha male figure and all this crap. But then, and they quote the fact that he's against Israel, but then the guy simultaneously persecutes Chechen Muslims in his own area. So I think Gaddafi was clever with his Palestine policy. I don't think it was just about Palestine, but his policies were also about himself. That's just my opinion.
Right, it's a rallying cry.
Anti-Semitic as well, not just anti-Israel. Like some of them were just clearly anti-Semitic.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.